Hello, my name is Rinon and welcome to my mechanical walkthrough for the second phase of P12S. This is the final Savage Endwalker turn, and they definitely make us feel small in comparison to the fight ahead of you. I just want to make a little note that this guide was made in week 1 using my group's clear experience and also the other current strats out there available. If I think better strats form over the coming weeks, I will release videos covering them as well. Okay, let's get into it. Athena opens with Ultima, which is a raid-wide damage. Around about 2 10% mitigations at least should be used here, but the damage isn't too insanely scary. She will follow up with a Palladian Grasp, which is a 2-hit tank buster with a twist. Tanks will need to swap between the hits, but with each impact she will also cleave the entire half of the arena that the targeted tank was on. You can either invuln it, have the entire group swap sides between hits, or what I would recommend you do here if you don't decide to invuln, is to have the tank swap sides between hits and tank swap, meaning the group can stay completely still. She'll then cast Gaia Okos, which shrinks the players and playable space as well as hits every player for a massive raid-wide damage. This mini phase is short and simple, and it rears its ugly head later in the fight, so you will want to get exceptionally comfortable with all of its tells early on. As the Summon Darkness cast goes off, 3 harpies will spawn around the edge of the arena in a triangle-shaped formation. Chains will also tether support players to DPS players. You want to find the single ad that forms the top end of the triangle, away from the other 2 harpies, and have the group split to the left and right of it as the chains form, running to the edge of the arena to break them. Then, all 3 ads will shoot beams through the middle, leaving 2 safe zones where the group is. Demi-Parhelion is the next cast, spawning circular AoEs all across the arena. I recommend splitting the groups into support and DPS light parties. The boss will then cast Geocentrism, and as she does, her tentacles are going to wrap around the arena. You want to pay special attention to this. If her tentacles wrap around in a circular shape, a circle in the middle of the room will be safe. If she wraps 1 tentacle above and 1 below the arena, you want to look at whether the tentacles are vertical or horizontal. 2 lines will be safe in the north and south, or west and east here, in line with those tentacles. You can see all 3 patterns play out here. Your light parties are simply assigned 1 safe line each, or a position in the circle, and you spread in that area. There's tons of room to work with here, so you don't need to be precise whatsoever. Please bear in mind these AoEs are persistent, so wait a little while after they go off before you move in. Ultima will cast next. Then the first major mechanic will occur in the classical concepts. 12 shapes will spawn in the front side of the arena, segmented into a 3x4 grid. Each column will contain at least 1 blue hexagonal shape. Players will also receive PlayStation Circle, Triangle, X and Square debuffs on their heads, and an Alpha or Beta debuff. Players with the same PlayStation icon will be tethered together and must remain close to one another until their tether expires. The rules to solving this mechanic are as follows. Alphas must stand in between a triangle and a hexagon to block any potential link between them. Betas must stand between a cube and a hexagon to block any potential link between them. You have to prevent any shape from reaching the hexagons. Only 1 person can use each triangle or cube, meaning that overall there is only 1 possible correct solution for each pattern, and that solution will use every triangle and cube once. We send 1 PlayStation symbol to each hexagon, and because there is 1 hexagon per column, it's very easy to split. We decided to send circles left, then triangles in the second column, X's in the third column, and squares on the right side, but your mileage may vary. Then, you stand in between your hexagon and either an adjacent triangle or square depending on your debuff, making sure you are not blocking the pair next to you from also completing their puzzle. After a while, you will be tethered by the shapes and you must stay there until your debuffs expire. After a little while, the shapes will then explode for small circular AoEs around them if executed correctly, or raid wipe if executed incorrectly, so make sure to avoid them. As this mechanic resolves, Palladian Ray will cast. At the end of the cast, 2 tentacles will smash the arena near the northwest and northeast, and each will target the 4 closest players with cleaves. If you are hit with 2, or you stay in the persistent AoE from the cleaves for too long, you die. You should already have 4 players on each side naturally from solving the classical elements, so simply have them spread around the tentacle, ensuring that they leave the middle of the arena free. You want to attempt to aim their beams roughly at the intercardinals, but it's really not a precise mechanic at all. Then dodge out of them as they go off. Just make sure that you leave space for your fellow players to dodge into. Another Ultima follows, and a Crush Helm tank buster on each tank. This one is going to hit 5 times in total. The first 4 will give the tank a stack of vulnerability each, and the final big hit will deal massive damage. You can either invuln this buster, or you can Asuna the vuln stacks when they hit 4 before the final hit occurs. Caloric Theory is the next major mechanic here, and at the end of the cast bar the raid will take big damage. During the cast bar, 2 random players will receive a fire marker above their heads. This is super important for resolving the mechanic correctly later. At the end of the cast, 4 players will receive an Atmos Faction Wind debuff, and the other 4 will receive a Pyrofaction Fire debuff. All players will also receive stacks of Close Caloric. Note that Winds will receive 2 stacks and Fires will get 1 stack. Every time you move or take part in a damage split, you will gain a stack. At 5 stacks, you go boom and the raid will wipe. The goal of this mechanic is to get each fire into a 2-man stack with a wind, resolve the 4 stacks that occur, and then have the 4 non-wind players move away from their wind partners into 2-man stacks with the other players as the winds resolve for circular AoEs around each targeted player. In order to solve this mechanic, we have the group spread into pre-assigned positions in a hexagon shape, with the 2 players marked during the cast bar in the middle. You can have fixed positions for this, and if you are marked, you go in, and someone in the middle will come and take your spot. Then, the 2 outer wins, as a note, this is not random, those 2 pre-marked players in middle will always be marked with a wind. So the 2 outer winds will rotate to stack on their closest clockwise fire player. If there is a wind in their closest clockwise position, they will instead rotate anti-clockwise. Once these 2 stacks have been formed, the players in the middle have 2 choices left. They will move out and stack with those 2 remaining solo fires. It should always be a DPS and a support left in the middle, so send the DPS to the first clockwise spot from north, and the support to the first anti-clockwise spot from just west of north. The 2-man stacks will go out, and the wind players will now stay here for the rest of the mechanic. Their responsibilities have been fully carried out. 2 of the 4 fire players will now receive fire marks on their head to signify they will be the source of another 2-man stack incoming soon. They need to pair up with the 2 unmarked fire players, but away from the winds. The marked fire players will look clockwise. If the first group they see has no fire stack, that's going to be their pair partner. If the first clockwise group has a fire stack, he looks counterclockwise instead, and the first pair there will be his partner because they will have no fire stack. Unmarked players will do this too, but they will look counterclockwise first, and then clockwise. Finally, you need to determine where the 2 of you are going to stack. If you are next to each other, you move to the outer intersection of the grid on the floor between you. If there is 1 marker between you, you go stand on the marker. If there is more than 1 marker between you, you go middle. The fire stacks will go off, the winds will harmlessly explode, and the mechanic will resolve. These animations here showcase a couple of the possible patterns and show you really easy solutions to how you would resolve them. I really recommend watching through them because they are going to help you understand and solidify the thought processes that you need to be able to do this mechanic consistently. If you spend a couple of minutes playing around with these possible patterns on some graph paper, I'm sure it will become comfortable for you in-game. Pyrosis is next, and this mechanic is pretty simple, but it definitely hits hard. 2 proximity markers will appear in either the north and south, or west and east of the arena, and alongside this, exaflares will telegraph from the other 2 cardinal directions. You need to split your group up into 2 light parties depending on which exaflares you get. If you get north and south exaflares, you have a melee group and a ranged group. If you have east and west exaflares, do your normal left and right light party splits. Make sure to check the initial safe spot for the exaflares far from you too. Run to the walls between the exaflares, ensuring you are not too close to either pulsing AoE, and then the proximity AoEs will go off for massive damage. Then the exaflares will begin moving, and your group will now want to spread along the wall. You'll each take a fairly weak spread AoE here. Finally, you need to move back together directly opposite the initial safe spot for the exaflares coming from the other side of the room, and the mechanic is over as the exaflares harmlessly pulse past you. Another Ultima raid-wide follows, and then the cast bar for Pangenesis begins. This hit, like everything in this encounter, does massive damage. As the cast goes off, you want to have your group line up horizontally. 2 players will receive a single stack of DNA debuff, 2 players will receive a no DNA debuff, 2 players will receive 2 stacks of DNA with a white debuff, 1 with a 15-second duration, and 1 with a 20-second duration, and the final 2 players will receive 2 DNA stacks with a black debuff, again with the same 15 and 20-second durations. In this line the group has taken, if you are a no DNA debuff, take a step forward. If you are a 1 DNA debuff, take a step backwards. You'll now have 2 players pre-assigned into left and right spots from these roles, which is essential to solving the mechanic. So the leftmost 1 DNA and unmarked player will go left, and the rightmost of each will go right. Towers similar to those you saw in the first phase of P12S will spawn, but this time 2 players are needed to soak them. 1 will spawn on the east and 1 on the west, and then afterwards 2 more will spawn just next to the initial towers on each side, and another 2 on each side near the middle at last. The setup of this mechanic is the hard part. The execution is really simple. Once the towers spawn, dark debuffs will head to the white tower side. Light debuffs will head to the dark tower side. The first tower on each side will be taken by the single marked player and the short coloured debuff player on that side. Then, when the second set of towers spawns, the long debuff on that side will jump in the south tower, and the no DNA player will jump in the north tower. The 2 players that took the first tower will now need to check their debuff. If they do not have a dark or light debuff currently, they go to the same colour tower as the one they initially soaked. If they do have a colour debuff now, they go to the opposite colour in order to solve that tower. Now, a third set of towers will spawn, and all 4 players on each side need to look at their debuffs. They have no debuff, they take the same colour tower as the one they just took. If they have a dark or a light debuff, they take the opposite colour to solve the tower. Following all of this, 3 slimes will spawn in the northwest and another 3 in the northeast side of the room, and they will begin tethering players. The no DNA players from Pangenesis need to pick up all 3 tethers on their side and take them to the north corners of the arena. The group will stand near the back on the left side of the room and the tank on the right side of the room. While I don't usually advocate for rescue strats, I actually think having a tanky and Vuln this incoming buster and rescuing the player that took the 3 tethers on the east side is the easiest and simplest way to deal with this part of the fight. It's what we did, and it's what I recommend you do as well. After this, the rest of the mechanics will be repeats but with a twist. Classical Concepts is up first. You will be tethered in the exact same way as before, and you need to find and solve your mechanic in the same way as before as well. So head to your hexagons in pairs, figure out where you're blocking, and watch as Athena casts Panta Ray. Then everything flips 180 degrees and panic ensues. You need to wait for her cast to begin, and then move through to the diagonal opposite position on the arena of your spot to the other side of the room and stand there. Then, when the shapes teleport and instantly tether at the end of the cast, you will be in the correct position. The way I found to do this really easily is to physically go to your initial spot, angle your camera directly through the middle of the arena through the middle two shapes, which naturally has you pointing directly at your destination. Then, when you move, there can be no confusion as to where you need to go. Palladian Ray will happen once again, but this time it happens during the mechanic rather than after, so once your tether has locked in and you can move freely, move to the intersections between 4 of the shapes, and resolve your spread and bait there. Ultima will then follow, and another Crush Helm before Athena casts the second iteration of Caloric Theory. This one, in my opinion, is much easier than the first. Players will set up once more in their hexagon, just this time with one player at the back right side of the hexagon, as you can see here, instead of in the middle. 7 players will get green markers on their head, and 1 random player will get a red marker on their head. That 1 red marker player will now go into the middle of the hexagon, and the middle hexagon player will take their place. Then, one of the outer players will receive a fire mark on their head. For now, you do nothing, but then a circular AoE will shortly appear on the floor beneath you, and you are going to run to the next player clockwise of you in the circle in order to give them your entropification debuff. Then once the next AoE puddle appears underneath the both of you, you are going to run outside of it to the outer edges of the arena. Once the debuff has been traded across the entire group, including the player at the tail end of the hexagon, it will lastly be passed to the player in the centre of the arena, who will move to the marker where the tag game initially begun. Pyrosis will cast once again, and during this cast, all of the wind puddles that have been dropped during the mechanic will execute, so be sure not to move until they've all gone off. There is exactly one scenario in which this game of tag will need to rotate anti-clockwise instead of clockwise, and that is if the player clockwise of the tail end player is the first one targeted with the fire marker. Because the outer player cannot be the last player before middle, in that situation you would rotate the other way. Pyrosis then happens exactly the same as before, followed by an Ultima raid wide. Gaia Okos will then cast, just like at the start of the fight, for massive damage, enabling the group UAV once again. Players will stack in the middle for Summon Darkness, just the same as you would before, but this time the puddles on the floor and the tentacle safe spots will happen at the same time. So you want to wait in the middle of the arena for your chains to spawn, you want to then check the ads to find the lone one to run left and right of it, and then you want to look at the tentacles to discern if it is a horizontal or vertical spread. The chains will then form, so you run towards the left and right of the solo ad, which will put you directly next to one of the AoEs at the edge of the room. Then you simply have to dodge a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right to be safely on the edge of the safe spot for either the horizontal or vertical AoE, whichever one you have. And then lastly, you will spread within that safe spot. Finally, players are going to want to pair up. One support player will pair up with a DPS. Either all supports or all DPS will be tethered to 4 ads at the edge of the arena. Stretch your tether directly opposite your harpy, and have your partner stand in front of you to block the beam. This is followed by an Ultima, and then the role that was not tethered before will now be tethered. Do the exact same thing, with the untethered players in front of those stretch tethers protecting them from the beams. Another Ultima follows, and then finally the boss will begin to cast her Enrage. The Enrage of this fight is extremely lenient, so once you have the mechanics down with a relative level of cleanliness, you should be able to claim your shiny new weapon. I really hope that this guide helped you at least a little bit. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. I plan to have guides for the entire raid tier out within the week, so if you need help with any other fight, hopefully it'll be up soon. Thank you so much once again for watching.